Good afternoon, everyone. This is Efeline, Iron Cloud Two Dogs. Shina Ikikchui takes the role of woman. I'm from the Oglala Lakota and Crow people. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, our Talking Circle webinar on communication planning. I'm the Senior Advisor for the Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention, Tribal Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center. And I'm here with my wonderful relative who will be introducing herself now.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erin Stenelk. Also, I am known by my Lakota name, which is Winate Hinapewi, and I'm so very happy to be here with you all today to talk about our communication planning.
Thank you, Tilda. So we are here with, in the background, our wonderful colleagues and relatives at the Training and Technical Assistance Center, Nicholas Birdshead and Gandra Laval. Thank you for helping us being of support and getting this webinar delivered to you all. So thank you for that. We have Gordon, Laurel, Michelle, Preston, Reed, Ursula, and hopefully others will be joining, but we're really glad that you can join us. And wherever you are from, I don't see where you're from, but I do know that you're working in Indian country, you're working on behalf of tribal youth, and I want to thank you for your work, and I'd like to acknowledge all of the good things that are going on in your communities and among your people. And I'd also like to acknowledge the hardships, the challenges, the losses that your communities face. We all go through that, and we know how it feels when we lose somebody in our community or if we have some type of challenge. So thank you for being here. I know you're all very, very busy, so we'll go ahead and get started here. So our agenda is we'd like to bring to you, and many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with communication planning. This is a resource to support you in developing your communication plan for your strategic action plan. So what we'd like to focus on is identifying types of communication with a focus on cultural communication. We'd like to talk about effective and ineffective communication strategies and share some examples through a communication plan template, and we'd like to get more specific with defining elements of a communication plan. We will have time for questions and comments and wrap up during the wrap up, and like Nick said, if you do have a question, type it into the chat. We will be unmuting the lines periodically to have a discussion with you all on certain topics, and we'll be looking at resources, and that will be our webinar, and we would like to encourage everyone to complete the evaluation. So what is a communication plan? We may have different ideas and different definitions, but generally it's a framework that's formulated to provide a process for either public or non-public messaging and interpreting messages. And it's a tool to help with accomplishing your project, to achieving your goals. So for example, if you have a public communication plan, you might have a radio station, like on our reservation, the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, we have Kili Radio. And there every week, almost every day, there's a different program on there talking about what they're doing, giving the community an update on their projects. We may have non-public messaging and a way of interpreting messages. So for example, we may work with parents or families, community members on strengthening families and what is the message that we are trying to get out, and how do we interpret the messages received from the parents and families, and how do they interpret the messages they receive from us. So the communication plan is very critical to making sure that we're getting our message out and that we understand that we're interpreting in a way that will help us to achieve our goals and objectives. Some purposes of communication, for example, might be to inform. So you want to inform about an upcoming event. So you send out a flyer, you have a public service announcement, maybe on TV, radio, newspaper. Or maybe you want to persuade. Perhaps you want to influence behavior change. So you might do training in person, online, through a webinar like this, or maybe audio recordings. Maybe you'd like to engage the community to influence some type of action. So, for example, maybe there's you'd like to influence the level of violence that's going on in the community. So, and you'd like the community to take action and to become engaged. So you might set up a public forum and get people's input, get people's thoughts on what can be done to reduce the level of violence in a community. And from that, then you would be able to get names, you would be able to get ideas and thoughts and put that into some type of action plan, for example. You might use social media for people to engage people to take some type of action. You may develop a memorandum of agreement or understanding, and with certain, agencies, organizations, schools, and you like to engage them in your work, which then becomes our work, the community's work. Another purpose of communication is to instruct, teach how to do something, perhaps in person or a video or even an audio. You can go to YouTube and find, how to do certain things, and that's the purpose of that communication, is to instruct. So there's other purposes for communication. One negative that I could think of is gossip. So what is the purpose of that communication? It might be to inform, it might be to persuade, it might be to engage, probably not to instruct, but it may be to, for a negative purpose, like to influence somebody to think, negatively about another person. So we have to think about the purposes, both negative and positive communication.
Okay, thank you for that, Kathleen. I think that's really a great slide in the last one, and although it might seem somewhat, thinking about, well, why am I going to communicate what I'm trying to communicate? It's good to always go back to the foundation and the purpose of what you're trying to do, to really spearhead and follow through with the planning and the intent of the main purpose of the communication. So here are the types of communication. So there are cultural types of communication. Some things to be thinking about are communication boundaries, some strategies, techniques of your stakeholder, and this is also your target community or population. So thinking about if there are certain cultural protocols that need to be taught or thought of to follow when you are thinking about cultural communication. Looking at verbal, so how you're presenting yourself, the words that you're using, both verbally and then also written, as you see below. And then there's also the nonverbal type of communication. So That's the way, you know, you're holding yourself, or when you're talking, if you're making eye contact or not making eye contact, you know, the way that your hands are when you're presenting. Those are the different types of communication to think about with nonverbal. So what we're going to go into now is looking at a discussion. If you could either chat, if you feel more comfortable typing in the chat box in the bottom left of your corner, or we're going to unmute the lines. So if you could provide some feedback, describe some issues, strategies, or examples related to cultural communication that you've experienced. So if any one of our 8 participants, Michelle, Preston, Reed, Ursula, Laurel, Gordon, Devin, or Christina, if you could share some issues or maybe some examples related to cultural communication that you've experienced. It's always really helpful to hear from people that are participating in this because they've lived the experiences, and it's good to hear from you guys.
Well, John, Preston is asking what has other issues been with communicating with elders. So there's certain, I guess, segments of the community that you would communicate with differently. I think that's the point that Preston's trying to make. Preston, do you want to do you want to speak on behalf of your question, or would you prefer to chat? One of the things I think is the age difference, and Preston, I think you're referring to acknowledging someone younger than them. And I've heard this before, that a lot of times younger people will hesitate to speak because they don't think they'll be acknowledged, or they won't be acknowledged because of their age. So that's a valid, I think that's a really valid issue and a great example.
Okay, it looks like Christina is also going to pose a question. Christina has said, what we have been trying to work is a positive word of mouth. So getting people to communicate about a sweat happening or something happening at our longhouse instead of the usual negative gossip. So that sounds like a really great style of communication at the system level, trying to change, you know, gossip or negative communication into something positive.
And I think that's a really important point, because sometimes when you're confronted with, like what you talked about, Christina, about, you know, a negative gossip, trying to turn the conversation to a more positive tone, I think there's, I guess, techniques or ways to do that. What do you all think? Devon, Gordon, Laurel, Michelle, Reed, Dan, what are you thinking? And I think that goes back to the cultural communication boundaries, and cultural not necessarily in the sense of racial or ethnic culture, but community culture. Like what is the culture in, for example, an office setting? You know, how do people communicate with one another? What are the boundaries? You know, what are some accepted practices for communication? I worked in a place one time, not this place, where people were in cubicles and everybody emailed each other, even though they were in the next cubicle or a couple cubicles down. And the reason for that was to document, the communication, that makes sure that everybody was clear. It was a little bit strange to me. I had to get used to that, but it was accepted. It didn't say, it wasn't written anywhere that we had to do that, but it was accepted. So we build a culture, right, wherever we are. In our homes, what are some of the communication practices, the boundaries, or whenever we go to a ceremony, what are the communication boundaries, or if we go to a meeting, who speaks first, I guess it would vary. So what do you all think? I know you all had a great lunch, or maybe you're going to have lunch after this. So what are some of your thoughts? Laurel, Gordon, Devon, Christina, Preston, Reed. Those of you that have been making comments in the chat, thank you for that. Ursula? I think those communication strategies, though, in order to reach your audience, say you would like to reduce alcohol and substance abuse in a community. A great example that I can think of is I'm from the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. Right outside our border is White Clay, Nebraska. Now, White Clay, Nebraska became known for a lot of people, our relatives, drinking there, passing out there. There was not any, law enforcement there. The state of Nebraska was called out basically for the condition of that little community. And it's not even a town. There's a grocery store there, and there was like 3 liquor store outlets and a little drive-in restaurant. So, but there was a lot of people drinking there openly, and people that were passed out in the field there. There was a man that had, passed out, and then they were burning the weeds, and he got burned. There were some very terrible things that, happened there. And there was a group of people that came together, and they did like a campaign. They started with a communication campaign where they started taking pictures and started having meetings and publicizing, the discussion, and going to the state of Nebraska and putting that out on, the media, whether it was social media or, the newspapers or radio. Then they had marches, and they did, over the past few years, they did a lot of work in terms of communicating that this was not acceptable. And now, if you go through that little community, there is nobody there. There's nobody passed out. There's nobody drinking. And how they did it was they went to the Nebraska, I don't know what it's called. I think it's called the Liquor Commission, where they license stores to sell liquor, and they asked them to not renew their licenses. And they didn't. So they no longer sell alcohol there, so there's no longer a market there. So it was very effective over time. That's just an example of, how important communication is. If people did not take pictures, if they did not, put the word out there and be consistent about it, have a consistent message, this is not acceptable, then nothing would have happened. So that's just an example of that. So I will turn it over to Erin to talk about the benefits of a communication plan.
That was a great example, Eslene. And thank you all for posting some experiences and feedback down in the chat. It sounds like many of you are really trying to focus on not just the problems and complaining, but also really looking and being solution-focused, being strength-based, finding people's strengths and strengths out of the situation and moving forward. So thank you so much for those comments. And next, we're looking at some of the benefits of communication plans. As you had mentioned to me, Etheline, so really looking at when you outline how people plan to communicate with one another on various tasks or activities, it really helps prevent miscommunication and misunderstandings. So when you're going in and everyone is knowledgeable and the purpose and the intent is up front and everyone is aware of it, it really can just help things flow a lot smoother and prevent miscommunication and any type of last-minute requests, et cetera, that sometimes can slow down what you're trying to accomplish. The other benefit of communication plans is establishing the boundaries and protocols for communication. So making sure that the appropriate people are contacting, maybe for example, directors of other programs, maybe having a director-to-director protocol for communication, or who's going to contact, for example, the OJJDP program managers, but also, you know, within the organization too, who's going to take any type of ideas or issues to tribal council. Also, another benefit of communication plans is identifying a timeline and a calendar, both for internal and external communication activities. So this is really a great way to map out expectations for people and for the tasks, and really looking at what's happening in not only within the organization, but also within the community. So seeing who you can identify as partners to help champion what you're trying to get across in your communication. And the last one that we have up here is really honoring communication protocols. So again, you know, what is the expectation within the culture of your organization, within the culture of your tribal community, and then also really looking at communication protocols and honoring that within other organizations and people that you're working with. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on. We're going to move into a discussion again. So Julie Etheline had, you know, shared a story that showed some effective communication strategies and the huge, amazing outcome of that communication plan and that effort. So we want to hear from you again about what are some effective as well as ineffective communication strategies that you have seen within your programs or seen within the community that you're in. So those of you that are able to talk, feel free. The lines are unmuted. Feel free to go ahead and step up and share some effective and ineffective communication strategies that you've seen. You're also invited to chat in the box.
So Laura was talking about how effective Facebook is for getting the word out to families, and she commented on how when she sends out an email or calls, she doesn't get a response as quickly as she would if she put it out on social media. So I think that's something that you know, is pretty, I guess, apparent out there. You know, a lot of people are on Facebook. I don't know what the users, probably what, billions maybe, and so that's effective, you know, for communication, getting the word out, you know, to families. So, but on the other hand, there may be some people that do not use Facebook. So, Christina, do you want to elaborate on how social media has been both positive and negative? I see your comment there. If you'd like to speak out loud, or if you prefer to chat, that's fine. She's commenting about email and newsletters having, they're not so effective, and maybe we could discuss that a little bit, about, why are they not effective, email and newsletters? Because it would seem, that people, I think everybody has email addresses, and so when we send out a newsletter through the email, then it might be ignored because of, fill in the blank, because of what? What are some reasons that that wouldn't be effective for some of you?
I would have to say with me, even for our Native American Parent Committee, I will get the email reminder, but it kind of falls in with many, many emails and can get lost. So when we decided that, people maybe weren't reading their email, we decided to do phone calls as a reminder, and we each took turns. And that personal phone call and text reminder, really was more effective in reminding me that I needed to prepare something and go to the meeting and how important it was. So that changed for us.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up getting more parents coming, and I ended up going more as well.
Mm-hmm. I think that's important to note, that Christine is talking about. The positive is that you can reach more people, through social media, but the negative part is people posting comments that are negative, and she's talking about, asking questions or voicing a concern in a healthy way is, sometimes that just isn't there. So it might be seen as a forum, to comment negatively. And I always think about, if this person is in the same room with me, would I say it? Would I say that? What I'm posting, or what anybody's posting, would they say that to that person if they were in the same room with them? Or is it because people can't see each other, or it's more impersonal and gives more freedom and latitude to say whatever we want? So that's something that is important. Laura was talking about texting families. Do families sign up to receive a text? And I think that's real important because everybody texts. I think there was, I read an article, and it was an online article about teens texting, and this father looked at his daughter's phone, and she had, I don't know, it was like thousands and thousands of texts over just a period of, like a month. And he was amazed at that, that she could text that much with somebody. So texting is, whenever I get a text, I don't have an alert on there. And so sometimes I'll miss a text, but there's people that I noticed have alerts on their phones. And so as soon as they get that little ding or sound, and they'll pick up their phone and look at it and respond right away. So that might be, an effective way to reach people. I don't recall who it was, but somebody commented on newsletters having the same content, and so people just overlook them, and it's perceived as not really, I guess, not anything new, So that might be a lesson learned for us too, is that if we're going to put out a newsletter, then what's the content, or are we giving the same message over and over again, but not using any really creative ways to reach the people, So I think that's an important point. Thank you for that. And let's see. I want to make sure I'm getting people's comments here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think Stan, thank you so much for that comment too. I think his comment speaks to the fact that, you know, even if you start out and fill out the communication plan template and have a stakeholder group and are looking at various channels, they might have to change, you know, within a month, or they might have to change at 6 months because, you know, something might change in the community or with the target population that you are trying to, you know, get your purpose or intent across. So I think that's a good point, that maybe at first the emails might have been working, but then when you decided that face-to-face was working better with elders, and, you know, hosting a dinner and sharing stories, that actually ended up being more effective. So I think we'll go into that a little bit when we look at the template, but just knowing that your channels, you know, reviewing your channels biannually or even more so, that's encouraged and fine to do.
And there was a comment about, you know, what makes the communication strategy effective and how the relationship with the community is a big part of that. And I agree, you know, I think we may have a very poor relationship with our community as an agency or program or school or even as an individual. So whatever we say, people are going to receive that message through that lens of, you know, our relationship. So thank you for that, Christina. Okay, let's talk about examples of effective and ineffective interpersonal communication strategies, interpersonal contrast. So if you were to be in the same room with somebody and you're talking with them, something that might be effective is listening, really listening. In the Lakota language, there's a word for listen, and it's anavokta. Anavokta, if you break down the word, is people would say ah, and whenever somebody said ah, historically, whenever I was little, I remember my parents and my grandfather, my aunties and uncles saying ah, and then everybody would come to attention because they were what they were saying when they said ah was listen, you know, there's something, you know, listen, do you hear that, you know, and naho means to kind of record it, like to record it in your mind. Da is like to turn it over, examine it, analyze it. So anavokta in the Lakota language refers to listen, but it actually has a deeper meaning. The concept is to hear it, stop, pay attention, hear it, record it in your mind, and then think about it, analyze it. You know, that's really the you know, the concept of the Lakota word for listen, anavokta. And you nod, you know, that, you know, the person I guess an idea that you are there, that you're fully present. So ineffective would be interrupting, you know. So say Tojan Erin, if she was talking about something and then I interrupted her, what I'm really saying with that action is that what I have to say is more important than what you're saying. So I'm going to interrupt you. So the underlying message is, you know, basically disrespectful. Being fully present, engaged. So not texting or scrolling or trolling, you know, whatever they call it, while listening, you know, or reading something, you know. So I think that gives the indication, if you don't do those things, that you're fully present, you know, that you're engaged in the conversation. How many of you have gone to meetings where people there's a speaker in front, but there's people on their phones, you know, they're scrolling or they're texting, and, you know, granted, everybody's busy and people want to take advantage of, you know, some time to respond to perhaps a very important email or something. But the message that we're giving whenever we do that is that I'm not hearing what you're saying is not important to me, and I'm going to engage in this other activity, so that's very ineffective. Another strategy might be to give feedback or paraphrase. So that would be an indication of listening, being fully present, and the person understands or knows that you've actually heard what they're trying to say. An ineffective strategy is taking the discussion in another direction before the topic is fully discussed. So say Toja, Aaron, and I were talking about, some type of strategy to meet a certain goal or objective, and she offers a strategy, and then I take it into a totally different direction, without completing that process of, well, let's talk about your strategy and what you think, and, let's decide if we're going to use that, or, we're just being respectful about the other person's opinion and input and ideas. Observing respectfully, that I think in Indian country takes on a whole different dynamic. When somebody is staring at somebody, then in some places it's seen as a challenge. Why is that person staring at me? But some people might just be curious. So it's important to know, I guess, your community, know your culture and the culture of that organization or community. The acceptable behaviors and unacceptable behaviors. So, any thoughts on that? Any comments on that? So that was more, along the lines of interpersonal. So interagency and program communication strategies, what are some effective and ineffective? These are just examples, and they're not, this is not the total list. You all have some great ideas about what's effective and ineffective regarding interagency communication, program to program, program to community. So something that is seen effective is a memorandum of agreement. So, for example, everybody's on the same page about, we're going to share these resources. This is how we're going to accomplish this goal, and we are all in agreement. So we'll sign this, formal document about how we're going to work together, how we're going to collaborate on this. Something that might be ineffective is verbal last-minute requests for assistance with funding or resources. I know that our tribal council, from what I observe, I've never been on the tribal council, but from what I observe, they get a lot of requests, and some of them are based on emergency. Some of them are based on, a very urgent issue, perhaps. But some of them could, be, I guess they could be more timely, give more notice. So, that's an ineffective way. The people receiving the requests don't have time to really review. So there might be, unrealistic expectations. A memorandum of understanding, which is less formal, maybe might be just sharing information, or we're going to meet every month to talk about, our work together. So it might be less formal, and there might be less resource sharing. Another effective way of communicating is through collaboration. You are a partner. I am a partner. We are all in the same circle, and we are on the same team. So, and we value each other. That's, I guess, kind of like the principles of collaboration. An ineffective strategy in contrast to collaboration is turf guarding. So this is my territory. This is my program. I've been here a long time, and I know how things work. There might be community or family feuds, and that might drive who one chooses to work with. So, that's something that we have to be aware of, is really looking at our organizational behavior. So another effective strategy might be a review of collaborative networking and celebrating, our accomplishments together. So going back to the memorandum of agreement or memorandum of understanding, reviewing, how did we do with this? Is there something that we need to change in this memorandum? Or, we did really good, let's celebrate, let's have a community supper, to celebrate this accomplishment of working together. Something that's ineffective is moving forward without reflection. How did we do? What can we do differently? Those questions are not considered, and, not celebrating accomplishments together. Another effective way of communication with among agencies and with the community is to write letters of acknowledgement and appreciation. And that's really important because sometimes people contribute to certain events or certain initiatives, and they're not acknowledged. And if you acknowledge them, then there's a greater chance of them collaborating in the future or contributing in the future. So not acknowledging contributions of stakeholders is really, really, I guess it would be a negative, the expectation for people to chip in and help, but not acknowledging, that this is what they're doing, and without you, this couldn't have gotten done. I don't know if if you want to comment on the, any comments in the chat, Tolja?
Yes. Let's see. I know that Devin had said, okay, yes. So he's speaking to a collaboration with other departments and the turf guarding that you had spoken to earlier about being ineffective. So he was just commenting on that. And Devin, in my experience, I've run into that as well. And a strategy that I've tried to implement and that has been effective is taking the time to understand what their goals and objectives are, usually because, in many of our tribal communities, our programming is funded by, it's usually grant-based. So, really working to see what their goals and objectives are, their mission and vision, and trying to figure out a way that, that we connect with our program's mission and vision, goals and objectives. If there's some way to leverage funding or even in-kind funding, office space or person power, et cetera, that's usually a way that I found to be effective in working with others who maybe at the beginning aren't really looking to collaborate or don't want to collaborate. And then also I've reached out to, administration or tribal council and made those connections about how we can partner so that they can see, just in case it might have to come from top down to get people to work together a little bit more. And one last thing that I'd like to comment is when you get youth involved, I've really found that when youth are speaking about your program goals and objectives, on our part of the communication plan and the other strategic planning components. People really listen to youth. So anytime that you can have youth on board as a shadowing opportunity or even summer internship, when they're on board and helping communicate your programs, goals and objectives, things seem to get done.
Thank you for that, Pooja. So we have about 15 more minutes left. So why don't we go into elements of a communication plan, which I think you were going to discuss.
Yep, sure. So these are some of the elements of a communication plan. We will, in the downloads, there is a communication plan template. We also have a strategic action plan template that we will be able to share with you again. But this one, it basically is just one example of a communication plan, the different components. So the first column, you have your stakeholder or your target population or audience. And the first one you can see it's parents, and then it's starting to really look at your purpose. What are the key information areas that you want to provide or gain? What are the key messages that you are trying to convey? And so here it's, strengthening families. Then it start looking at the methods and the format of communication. So this would be the channels that you're looking at, and this is parent and family meetings in this example. Then you want to think about how often are you going to communicate with the parents through this channel, and here it's biweekly. You also want to begin thinking about when you're going to send and hold the communication. So that, in this example, it's looking at every other Sunday. And then you want to begin thinking about who is responsible for organizing and developing, and then who is responsible for actually engaging that communication channel. So who's responsible for the organization and developing, kind of doing the legwork and the background work of setting up the communication, and then who's actually going to deliver the communication. So those are a couple of components that we feel are effective in helping to develop a communication plan. But like I said, there's many different ways to do this. So feel free to move this around a little bit or add something that you might think would be effective.
So Pooja, Stan has a good example of a way to, an effective way to communicate among partners through a multidisciplinary team. And they have departments and programs, schools, meeting on a regular basis, I'm assuming, and I think that would be something, very effective for, well, this is what we're doing, from our program,
Yeah.
How are we getting together? How are we, how are we going to accomplish this goal together? So thank you for that, Stan. If we did miss any comments or questions in the chat, I apologize. We'll try to get to them in the question and answer section. So what are effective communication plans? And again, this is, you have really great ideas and you all have experience in, this area. These are just some ideas, about what is effective. They're written, for example. If we don't have a written communication plan, we don't really know, what are the protocols, what are the boundaries, how often do we meet, and I would really like to see a family communication plan. I think the tendency is to think about communication plans in terms of organizations, in terms of a grant or a project. But how do we, how do we as families communicate? What are the protocols? What are the boundaries? And I think that would be really helpful, to anybody and to everybody. They have consistent messaging communication plans do, that we have a strong message about what we are doing, how we're going to do it, and basically our principles. The communication plans also address crisis and regular day-to-day communication. So say if there is something that happens at one of your programs or your schools, that is crisis in nature, then how do you communicate with, first of all, the community, the parents, whoever the stakeholders are, if it's a crisis situation, what is the communication process? Regular day-to-day communication, like there's people that will train their people on, how to greet the public and to see the public as, these are our people that we serve, and we have a responsibility to be polite, to be, to extend ourselves, to provide refreshment. In the Lakota, in Lakota country, that's pretty common. If you go to an organization or agency or, somebody's home, then you're usually offered something, to drink or to eat, and the expectation is that, just sharing, generosity. So, and that isn't written anywhere, but it's accepted practice, of this is how we communicate with the public. A communication plan has external and internal communication processes. So how do we communicate externally with our partners, our collaborators? How do we communicate internally with one another? Communication plans effectively should be transparent. Everybody should know about it. Everybody should have input in developing them. Effective communication plans are part of formal and informal partnerships and collaborative networks. They include regular and ongoing training. So, for example, what is the script, I guess, for when somebody calls and is very irate about program service, their dissatisfaction? What is the, what are some scripts that you can develop to, communicate effectively with the public? So that might be a training item. Communication plans will monitor media coverage for errors in reporting. So like say somebody does a review of your program, or maybe they visited your program or your school, and they say, well, this is, what I've seen, and this is what they do. So, monitoring that and correcting, errors if there are any. So there's just different ways to, to look at how communication plans can be effective. Okay, so why don't we look at the questions and comments, Koja?
All right. Let's see. I think we already discussed and checked in with Stan about his multiple disciplinary team with departments. I think that's an amazing idea and a great way of communicating with the community. There was one a little bit earlier about with Preston. So he said, what is the difference between staring and observing? Can you go into detail for me, please?
I think observing respectfully is, I see a lot, I go to a lot of meetings, and I grew up in a time where when people listened at a meeting, or, they were communicating with somebody, then a lot of times they didn't look at that person. And staring was seen as, disrespectful. Staring meaning that you're just looking at, somebody staring without blinking, and, that can be taken in a different way. However, in another, culture, another setting, that might be perfectly acceptable, but in Indian country, I think, that's, it has to be carefully considered, as an accepted practice. So observing respectfully might be, looking down and then glancing at the speaker now and then, but not openly staring at them. Hopefully that's a helpful clarification.
I think that's great. Thank you, Kathleen.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other comments or questions that we possibly missed, or perhaps you would like to pose one? The lines are open, by the way. We'd love to hear your voices. Christina, Devon, Gordon, Laurel, Michelle, Reed, Sam, Ursula.
I just wanted to comment to everyone, when you are working on your communication planning, it's really good to be mindful and reflect your mission and vision statements that you have begun to develop for the OJJDP grantees. And I think what's also helpful, I find, with any strategic planning is tying them all together. Also is having any type of your guiding values or your principles up on the wall or next to you in a sheet to look at. So examples of those would be thinking about maybe, for us, it'd be like having the 7 Lakota values, maybe where everyone can see, to keep those in mind when you're thinking about how you're going to communicate with your stakeholders. And then also thinking about having principles up, your guiding principles. For example, it could be trauma-informed principles that we've talked about on other of our webinars. So thinking about how your communication plan can be trauma-informed and thinking about that as well.
I think that's a really important point, because what guides us? You know, what guides our communication? What guides our work? You know, it's our values. Whatever those values are, you know, they're the foundation, and that's how we operationalize, or that's how we give life to our values through our, you know, through our work and how we communicate with one another. Okay, we are just a few minutes from the end of our time. I hope this was helpful to you all. I really appreciate your participation, your comments. We have a strategic planning checklist. Just for example, as a reminder, actually, this is a checklist where we would like to just give a gentle reminder that, you know, the deliverables for the strategic planning are established an advisory community, develop mission and vision statements, revise SMART goals and objectives, engage trauma-informed webinar, develop a logic model, engage the voice of youth and community. So hopefully this communication planning talking circle webinar can contribute to your development of your overall strategic plan. We also have our downloadable files, like Toja Aaron mentioned. We have a sample communication plan template. We have a sample strategic action plan, communication plan template that we are wanting to share with you, that you can revise, use, you know, refer to it if you need to. Our references that we used, you know, we use some from the internet, and then we have also resources. We have the strategic action planning webinars link, and that's the link to it. These slides are also available to you. Because this is a recorded webinar, then you can view it later, or maybe your partners, you'd like to have your partners review it. So they're available. So thank you so much. Please complete the evaluation. Thank you all for joining us. Toja Aaron?
I want to thank everyone for coming aboard with us for this webinar. It was really good to hear from you. Thank you to Kathleen. I also want to thank the OJJDP, our staff at the TA Center, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.